the ancient Zen secret to letting go of your life's biggest regret. There is a dull, pulling ache located in your lower back right now, a heavy physical sensation that seems to drag your awareness down toward a phantom map of the years you have left behind. Your mind is trapped in a relentless midnight loop, counting back the months and seasons to a specific turning point, an old crossroad where you believe you made the absolute wrong choice. You are resting in a quiet room that smells of damp cedar needles and cold tree bark, while the thick, muffled silence of a fog-bound valley floor presses gently against the window panes. Your spine carries the structural fatigue of trying to walk two parallel paths at once, exhausting your current energy by living in the shadow of a ghost life that never actually took root. Please hear this soft truth before the darkness grows heavy. You are not stranded in a barren wasteland, and the current ground beneath you is not a mistake. Tonight, there is no need to justify the old crossroads, and your spirit is permitted to rest exactly where the forest floor has caught your weight. We often live under the painful illusion that our life has been permanently derailed by a single forgotten choice. We tell ourselves that if we had only spoken differently, if we had stayed in that old city, or if we had chosen the other career path, our present landscape would be entirely bright, clear, and free from sorrow. But ancient Buddhist wisdom offers a surprising grounding paradox that completely alters how we view our regrets. The mind does not suffer because we picked a wrong path among the trees. The heart breaks because we are ignoring the rich, dark soil that is actively forming under our feet right now, spending our nights staring backward at a map of a forest that does not exist anywhere in reality. We treat our present life as an accidental detour, forgetting that every single place where a seed lands immediately becomes the absolute center of its own growth. True inner peace does not appear when you magically undo the past, dear friend. It begins to breathe when you realize that the deep woods require no perfect roots to grow a beautiful, living canopy. Let your hips and thighs settle fully into the deep support of the mattress now, allowing the tight muscles behind your shoulder blades to relax into the quiet darkness. You do not need to solve the riddle of your old decisions before the morning light touches the room. Right now, it is entirely enough to let your breath widen horizontally across your lower back, letting the air nourish the immediate space you occupy without checking it against an old itinerary. Maybe you have felt this too, this quiet grief that whispers you have ruined your own destiny simply by being human. If it feels right, notice the exact place in your physical body where the shadow of what might have been has settled its cold weight. There is no need to aggressively tear that shadow out through forced willpower tonight. We are simply learning to sit down in the cool moss of the present moment, allowing the old maps to rest undisturbed in the dark, while we discover the quiet wealth of the ground we are actually standing on. In a short while, an ancient parable will carry us into a dense fir grove where forgotten choices lose their power to isolate the spirit. Imagine a deep, mist-heavy valley where the air always smells of wet bark, crushed needles, and rich earth mold. The twilight here is a thick, protective blanket of fog, and the only sound is the soft squelch of wet moss under a slow, deliberate step. An old herbalist lived in this isolated canopy, spending his seasons searching the bark of ancient trees for a medicine he believed he had lost decades before, until a simple tool revealed a different truth about the soil. The stillness of this immediate room is your sanctuary tonight. The phantom crossroads that haunt your memories are completely muted by the distance, possessing no physical authority over the air moving through your ribs right now. You do not need to fix the consequences of your old mistakes to deserve a peaceful night, and you do not need to force the current chapter of your life to look like a triumph before you can sleep safely. Every repeating regret that rises into your awareness is just an old echo, a phantom path that has no power to alter the solid comfort of the bed beneath your form. There is no requirement for you to be anywhere else tonight, no rule that blames you for the road you traveled, and no expectation for you to verify your position to the dark. Let the cool air enter your lungs like a quiet moisture settling over the forest floor, expanding your lower ribs naturally, without any forced strain, you might find that the terror of being permanently lost begins to soften when you realize that the earth supports your weight without asking which road you took to get here. We are not trying to achieve a state of sudden perfect enlightenment before the dawn breaks. We are simply giving the body permission to stop its frantic navigating, to let the immediate ground be completely sufficient for the night, and to rest securely in the deep velvet moss of this hour. The awareness often wanders down into the thick timber of the northern slope, when the mind is seeking a language for its oldest regrets. In a deep, mist-heavy valley where the great fir trees stood so close that the wind moved through the upper canopy like a distant tide, an aging herbalist named Jiro built his shelter. The air in this damp grove always smelled of wet tree bark, crushed needles, and rich earth mold. Jiro spent his days collecting roots and drying bark, but his nights were occupied by a secret, exhausting habit. He possessed a cracked, oil-stained horn vial, an object that had belonged to him since his youth, which he used to carry pressed seed oil for his lantern. 40 years prior, at the edge of the lowlands, Jiro had stood at a great triple junction in the road, deciding whether to enter the monastic life or stay in the mountains. He had chosen the mountains, but he had spent the subsequent decades convinced that he had picked the absolute wrong route, believing his entire life was a pale mistake. Every evening when the thick fog crawled across the forest floor, Jiro would sit by his small hearth and hold the oil-stained horn vial in his hand. He would look at the dark cracks in the horn, replaying the exact conversation that had driven him away from the valley temple, counting the years like lost currency. The pull of the memory was so intense that he barely noticed the magnificent green life that grew right up to his doorstep. He lived in the shadow of the man he might have been, imagining a parallel version of himself who was perfectly wise, completely at peace, and free from the ordinary isolation of the deep woods. He believed that because of that single, forgotten choice he was permanently stranded, stalled in a landscape that did not contain his true destiny. The horn vial, cold and stained by decades of residue, became the small anchor for all his internal litigation, a physical monument to what he assumed was his lifelong failure. The old forest around him, however, paid no heed to his silent arguments. The moss continued to soften the stones, and the fir needles fell in a continuous, quiet rhythm, slowly building up the rich soil beneath his boots. One afternoon, an elderly tree hollow keeper who spent his seasons collecting fallen pine cones at the base of the ridge came to Jiro's shelter to dry his sandals by the fire. This old man was known simply as the Gatherer, a person who had lived so long among the ancient cedars that his skin looked like weathered bark, and his eyes held the quiet expanse of the valley floor. He did not offer a lesson, nor did he ask Jiro why his brow was deeply furrowed in the dim light. He merely reached out his rough hand and asked to examine the oil-stained horn vial that Jiro was gripping so tightly in his lap. Jiro handed the object over, watching the old gatherer turn the cracked horn over in his thick fingers. The gatherer did not praise the craftsmanship, nor did he speak of the past. Instead, he walked out into the damp mist, down to a massive, fallen fir tree that had crashed to the earth decades ago during a great summer storm. The fallen giant was covered in a thick, vibrant carpet of emerald velvet moss, its wood slowly softening into the forest floor. The gatherer took the horn vial, uncorked it, and gently poured a single drop of the thick seed oil directly onto the damp velvet moss covering the bark. He then turned his quiet gaze to Jiro, asking if the oil had forgotten how to soften the wood, simply because it was no longer in the village lamp. He asked if the fallen tree was a mistake, because it no longer stood upright toward the sun. Jiro looked down at the dark drop of oil soaking into the vibrant green moss, and a sudden, sharp wave of emotional recognition loosened the muscles behind his shoulder blades. The profound sorrow he carried was not a real, physical feature of the forest around him. It was an entirely manufactured weight, a phantom map he had been tracing over the living ground, until he could no longer see the richness of the earth he actually inhabited. The path he had not chosen was a ghost, a mental structure that possessed no more substance than the fog drifting between the trunks of the fir trees. He stood perfectly still in the damp twilight, his fingers relaxing completely for the very first time in decades. The immediate forest suddenly felt immense, alive, and incredibly safe. no longer a place of exile, but a magnificent, dynamic laboratory that was already holding his existence completely whole. The old gatherer quietly tied his sandals, picked up his basket of pine cones, and disappeared back into the thick cedar grove without another word. Jiro did not instantly achieve a state of perfect, unbothered tranquility. The old habit of counting back the years still lingered like a faint echo in his mind, and the cracked horn vial still sat in his palm. But he did not return to the hearth to brood over the map. He sat down directly on the soft, mossy trunk of the fallen giant, letting his hands rest on the damp bark, choosing to inhabit the cool reality of the evening mist. The wind murmured softly through the high canopy above, a long, flowing sound that carried no regret, no blame, and no demand for a different journey. As the late hours deepened, the dense woods seemed to draw closer, wrapping the small shelter in a heavy, protective peace that absorbed the remaining tension from Jiro's bones. He leaned his back against a living fir tree, his breathing slowing down to a quiet, rhythmic cadence that matched the slow settling of the forest floor. He recognized that the ground did not require a perfect route to be fertile, and his own life did not need to be validated by an old choice to remain complete. He closed his eyes, letting the quiet presence of the valley carry him away from the narrow loop of his thoughts, drifting smoothly toward an undisturbed rest. The silence of the grove grew absolute, holding both the ancient trees and the sleeping herbalist in the same dark sanctuary. The air grew cooler, carrying the rich scent of wet earth and crushed cedar needles. As the fog filled every low clearing in the timber, every breath he took became a little wider, absorbing the vast stillness of the ridge, letting the old shadow of the crossroads lift from his heart. The oil-stained horn vial rested quietly on the wooden table inside the shelter. A simple piece of horn, no longer an anchor for his grief, but a quiet witness to the reality of the present. Jiro rested his weight fully upon the earth, feeling the continuous support of a ground that never asked which road he took to arrive at its center. He realized that the forest did not judge his direction, and the path he walked was already growing its own beautiful, necessary clearing in the dark. This old gatherer is not asking us to freeze our emotional landscape, nor is he suggesting that we develop an unfeeling frozen shell that ignores the actual movements of the heart. The deep, quiet understanding he shares does not mean you must become a rigid, hollow ghost, blind to the real weight of the crossroads you have faced. Instead, it invites us to look at a much softer truth that lives underneath our late-night grief. The original event, the choice that felt so heavy, or the real sadness of a path left behind is like a sudden lightning strike that splits an old fir tree, a physical occurrence that leaves a deep scar in the wood. That is the first touch, but our deepest, most painful suffering grows from the invisible habit that follows, where the mind continues to pour the thick seed oil of its own regret into that old fracture, day after day, year after year. We hold the cracked horn vial of our thoughts, and repeatedly look for a reflection of a perfect life that never existed, demanding that an ancient decision yield a different kind of reality. We wear out our spirit trying to change the trajectory of a seed that fell decades ago, believing that if we just remember harder, the ledger of our mistake will finally dissolve. What we often describe as attachment is simply this hot, gripping sensation that insists a past event must change its outcome before we are permitted to take a single deep breath. It is the persistent inner conviction that our sense of emotional safety depends entirely on correcting a map that was drawn years ago. When we experience craving, we are really feeling that painful, parched inner thirst which transforms a natural desire for peace into a relentless Latin-night labor. We believe we must force the unyielding memory to become bright, even when the road itself has been overgrown by the forest for decades. The gentle wisdom of the Buddha suggests that we can step completely out of this exhausting cycle. The practice of mindfulness is nothing more than the quiet capacity to notice the cracked vial in our hands, without automatically pouring its residue into our evening. It is the ability to perceive the heavy, internalized voice of regret as it drifts through our awareness, observing its dark texture without allowing it to drag us down into another hour of bitter navigating. When we begin to understand impermanence, we realize that the choices we regret do not possess a solid, everlasting reality. The dynamic that exhausts your spirit tonight is not a permanent monument carved in granite. It is just a passing vibration of old thought patterns that has already vanished into the vast sky. You do not need to conquer the history of your past, and you certainly do not need to destroy your own peace trying to satisfy a map that has no destination. True letting go does not mean you stop valuing the lessons of your life. It simply means you stop demanding that the old horn vial provide a light it cannot hold. It is the profound relief of allowing your personal history to remain exactly as complicated and imperfect as it is, while you choose to preserve the warmth of your own living chest. When we cultivate awareness, we create a spacious, clear atmosphere within our own ribs. This inner expanse can easily contain the damp fogs of the world without becoming lost itself. Compassion is the steady, gentle strength that allows us to meet our own overthinking without a single drop of judgment or self-blame. It is the soft hand we place on our own trembling fingers when we realize we have been fighting a losing battle against an old ghost path. The path toward freedom exists right in the middle of our daily constraints, a quiet equilibrium that does not require an ideal landscape to exist. Our suffering deepens only when we add the immense weight of our own expectations to an already heavy burden. We expect ourselves to never feel regret. We expect the closed doors of the past to open, and we treat our late night weariness as if it were a personal failure. In a moment, we will explore how this spacious wisdom can begin to soften the very real tightness you are holding right now. As the night grows deeper and the air grows cool, the fallen fir tree remains open, receiving the winter rain without standard defenses, simply reflecting the quiet moss that grows when the heavy navigating stops. Consider the immense relief that comes when you stop demanding a mirror from an old choice. We often believe that if we just perform our roles perfectly, or if we present our devotion in just the right light, the ground we left behind will suddenly open its arms to us. We wait for an admission of our wisdom like a dry grove, waiting for a flash of sunlight, holding our breath until the body itself feels brittle. But validation cannot be forced from a past that does not possess the capacity to offer it. When you allow the old crossroads to be exactly as limited as they were, a massive space opens up inside your own chest. You stop projecting your need for safety onto external maps that were never built to hold your value. You begin to see that your worth was never tied to the road you chose, just as the purity of the night wind is never determined by the cracks in the horn. Tonight you are allowed to leave the forest completely dark. The mind will try to tell you that you must resolve every old decision before you can safely close your eyes. It will whisper that if you let down your guard, the unyielding memory will advance and crush your sanctuary. But this is the language of hypervigilance, an old voice that confuses constant labor with true protection. You are actually safest when you are most spacious. By allowing the boundaries of your awareness to spread out wide, you become impossible to break. A rigid line can be shattered by a heavy impact, but a vast quiet expanse simply absorbs the movement and remains entirely whole. Let the unyielding things remain where they are, while you claim the soft, open ground that is already waiting to receive your presence. The ledger you carry has no physical substance. It is composed entirely of thoughts that have been repeated until they look like iron bars. But when you look through the open canopy, you see that the air passes through without any resistance at all. The space does not need to be rearranged to be clean, and your heart does not need to be validated to be whole. Let the memory of the heavy stone drop into the deep well of your past, letting the ripples fade away until the surface is perfectly level, perfectly still, and completely unbothered by the weight of what came before. You are entering a quiet agreement with the darkness tonight, a contract that requires no signatures, no duties, and no payments of energy to be completely valid. If it feels right, let your attention settle quietly into the physical space you occupy right now. There is no need to change your posture rapidly or perform a formal exercise, as we are simply allowing the natural weight of your body to sink into the bed. Perhaps you can invite your shoulders to widen slightly, letting the muscles across your upper back spread outward like soft earth, receiving a quiet autumn rain. Take a slow, unhurried breath in, drawing the air not deeply into a tense stomach, but horizontally across your lower back. Let the exhalation occur completely on its own. without any forcing, without any desire to reach a perfect state of calm. You might notice the gentle coolness of the room against your skin, a quiet reminder that the environment around you is already holding you without requiring any effort on your part. As you rest here, you may notice a specific thought or memory that has been persistently knocking at the door of your mind all evening. Perhaps it is the image of an old crossroad, a decision that refuses to be forgotten, or a relationship that leaves a long shadow behind. Do not try to banish this thought from your awareness, and do not try to fix it tonight. Even noticing its presence is entirely enough. If it feels right, give this repeating pattern a very soft, quiet name in your mind, recognizing it simply as the ancient habit of the horn vial. You might say to yourself, here is the old desire to pour the residue of what might have been into the present clearing. Now, if you wish, imagine that you are holding that cracked, oil-stained horn vial from our story, an uncomplicated object that carries no sharp edges and requires no strength to lift. In your mind, gently place that heavy, exhausting worry directly into the center of this container. Watch the image change in your awareness as you let the horn vial rest on the surface of the quiet forest floor. The dark soil does not split under the weight of your concern. It simply balances perfectly on the damp earth, containing the texture and the oil without losing its form. You do not need to push the object away, and you do not need to guide it to a road. Just watch what happens when your fingers loosen, allowing the vast canopy to carry the space exactly as it is. There is absolutely no requirement for immediate healing or sudden transformation tonight. You can return to the simple awareness of your physical breath whenever you are ready, letting the old ledger of your life remain completely unmoving in the distance while you inhabit this single, safe room. The forest floor does not judge the weight of what falls upon it. The moss simply widens to receive it, allowing the heavy edges of the world to rest effortlessly upon the fluid stillness of the night. Perhaps you feel a slight resistance to letting go of the tension, and that is completely natural. The mind has spent many years believing that if it stops replaying the crossroads, everything will dissolve into failure. If it feels right, just allow that resistance to sit inside the open space as well. Let it be as heavy and dense as it needs to be, without trying to make it light. The dark earth does not mind the density of the object. It only provides the space for it to rest. You might find that your jaw softens just a fraction when you stop trying to force the cracked container to disappear. Even a millimeter of space is enough to allow a new current of air to find its way beneath the surface of your evening. We are shifting our relationship with the fatigue, not trying to extract it from your bones by force. Let the breath become a slow horizontal wave, widening your lower ribs with each quiet arrival and softening your frame with each gentle departure. The room around you is perfectly dark, perfectly still, and entirely free from the necessity of labor. You have nothing to navigate tonight, no ancient choice to rectify, and no ghost life to protect. You can simply remain as the space that contains the breath, letting the shadows stretch out long and quiet across the floor, while the valley fog carries the heavy things away in its own unhurried time. You can return to the physical sensation of the mattress whenever the thoughts become too loud. Feel the absolute stability of the support beneath you, an unyielding ground that requires nothing from you. In return for its safety, the mountain outside can hold its own weight through the night, and you are permitted to let your small corner of the world hold itself too. Let your awareness spread wide, like the mist spilling over the ridges of the hills, finding the soft folds of the dark where the rest is deep, undisturbed, and beautifully free. You might notice the small pause that occurs at the very end of your exhalation, a tiny window where the old map is completely blank and no roots are drawn. Rest in that small clearing for just a brief moment, letting the darkness absorb the need to choose. The deep chill of the mountain winter eventually locked the high ridge in a heavy, brilliant frost, transforming the dense fir grove into a silent world of pale, crystalline needles. Jiro no longer spent his late hours turning the oil-stained horn vial over in his lap by the dying embers of his hearth. He had grown accustomed to sitting quietly on a low cedar log near the stream, watching the gray mountain mist weave through the upper branches, observing the changing winter light. without feeling the immediate necessity to recalculate the years he had spent in the woods. Yet, the true weight of his transformation was tested on a morning when the valley air was so cold. It stung the back of the throat. A younger woodcutter from the lowlands arrived at his shelter, seeking shelter from an impending blizzard, carrying a bundle of old tools and news from the village where Jiro's original crossroads had occurred 4 decades before. The traveler spoke casually of the old valley temple, mentioning that the great stone courtyard had been dismantled years ago to build a merchant road, and the lineage Jiro had grieved, leaving behind, had naturally scattered into the wind. Jiro felt a cold, familiar constriction clamp down instantly behind his breastbone, a sharp internal tightening that told him his decades of regret were built upon a structure that no longer even existed. The sudden realization that the alternate life he had romanticized was a phantom, an illusion that had disappeared from the physical earth, brought a fierce wave of panic to his stomach. The mind wanted to resist this emptiness, to scream at the sky for the absolute futility of his 40 years of self-chastisement, ready to drown in a new layer of bitter resentment. He stood perfectly still by the cold stone threshold of his hut, his hand gripping a small, blunt iron trowel with a notched wooden handle that he used for digging winter roots. His fingers tightened around the worn wood until his knuckles turned white, his breathing shallow and trapped within his upper ribs. In that long, suspended moment of intense emotional challenge, he looked past the woodcutter toward a shattered, dead tree stump that sat at the edge of the clearing. The old stump had been broken by a fierce gale years ago, a jagged monument of decay that Jiro had always considered an ugly scar on the landscape. Yet in the middle of the deep winter freeze, that very stump was covered in the rarest, most delicate medical moss in the entire valley, a vibrant green life that could only grow precisely where the wood had splintered open to catch the moisture of the fog. Jiro did not experience a sudden, magical surge of perfect enlightenment. The grief of his wasted mental energy was still burning like a cold weight in his center, and the old habit of treating his painful thoughts as absolute truth remained incredibly strong. But instead of reacting with anger or sinking into another loop of Latinite despair, Jiro took one long, deliberate breath of the freezing mountain air. He quietly loosened his fingers from the notched handle of the iron trowel, setting the tool down on the wooden bench beside the door. He walked out into the falling snow, knelt beside the traveler's wet bundle of firewood, and began to carefully arrange the kindling to build a larger, warmer fire for the stranger, choosing a simple act of discipline and immediate care over his own internal litigation. He allowed the massive uncertainty of his life's meaning to sit right beside him in the dark hut, stopping the automatic habit of obeying the frantic voices of his regret. The blizzard picked up late in the afternoon, blowing a thick curtain of white frost across the ridge, slowly burying the paths Jiro had walked during the summer months. Jiro sat quietly near the hearth, his hands resting open on his knees, watching the flames illuminate the simple wooden walls of his home. A quiet realization settled deep into his chest, a soft understanding that did not require a single map from the lowlands to be whole. The broken tree stump outside was not a failure of the forest, and his own journey was not a mistake simply because it began with a difficult choice. Every single place where the structure breaks immediately becomes the unique, necessary nursery for a growth that cannot happen anywhere else. He felt the ancient, permanent architecture of the valley holding his frame, a vast sanctuary that remained completely stable even when the old human institutions had turned to dust. He reached over and poured a cup of bitter root tea for the young woodcutter, listening to the rattle of the wind against the cedar shingles without checking the sound against his past. The air inside the shelter was warm, carrying the scent of dried moss and pine wood, cooling the final traces of the urgency in his mind. He recognized that his value had never been at the mercy of the road he left behind, just as the integrity of the mountain was never altered by the paths that faded under the snow. He watched the fire burn down to a soft, steady glow, his breathing slowing to a quiet cadence that matched the vast, unhurried turning of the winter night. The space within his shelter felt completely unburdened now, free from the necessity of an idealized past or a corrected destiny. The oil-stained horn vial sat on the shelf, a simple object of horn and wood, no longer a container for his grief, but a quiet piece of the earth that the darkness was slowly enveloping. Jiro let his weight drop fully into the absolute stability of his seat, letting the lingering voices of the lowlands dissolve into the immense cool silence of the late hour. The vast forest seemed to widen around his presence, carrying him smoothly toward a deeper, undisturbed quiet where no crossroads were required to be safe, and no lives were left to mourn. When we turn our attention inward during the quiet space of the night, we begin to uncover the deep, hidden architecture of our own emotional fatigue. The mind operates on an old, instinctive habit that mistakes constant mental defense for genuine safety. We spend our evenings carefully rehearsing future explanations, projecting potential misunderstandings, or replaying old choices as if the sheer repetition of the memory could somehow rewrite our history. We track the approval of those who have long since moved away from our lives, hoping that if we just construct the ultimate logical sequence, the current landscape will suddenly validate our worth. When that external reassurance fails to materialize, we rapidly turn the heavy judgment inward. We attempt to correct our own sensitivity through the strict enforcement of shame, telling ourselves that we are foolish or broken, simply because the old paths did not lead to a perfect clearing. We begin to build an entire identity around being the one who took the wrong turn, treating our exhaustion as a permanent home, until we forget that our true nature was always as open and vibrant as the living forest. Ancient Buddhist insight invites us to dismantle this internal mechanism with total, gentle clarity. There is a vast distinction between the raw impact of a difficult event and the heavy weight of the suffering we choose to construct around it afterward. The original injury, the loss of an old opportunity, or the sting of a difficult crossroads is like a sudden freezing winter gust that strips the dry bark from an ancient fir tree. It is real and it is uncomfortable. But our extra suffering is like trying to gather every single fallen needle from the forest floor, running frantically beneath the canopy to glue the dead wood back onto the living trunk so we can force the tree to look as if the storm never happened. The wind has already traveled miles over the ridge, completely gone from the valley, yet we remain on our knees in the damp dirt, sweating under the weight of the debris, wondering why our hands are breaking. True peace does not arrive because you have successfully prevented every winter freeze or corrected every old choice in the world. It begins to breathe when you choose to leave the fallen needles where they lie, allowing the ground to decompose the old shapes without needing to manage their direction. Every time we castigate ourselves for feeling regret, we are simply pouring more bitter oil onto a palm that has already been rubbed raw by the heavy rope of duty. We believe that if we abandon our mental defenses for even a single night, the chaos of uncertainty will permanently overwhelm our quiet room. But the self only suffocates in the forest when it tries to stand rigid against the natural cycle of change. When you allow your thoughts to exist as mere passing vibrations, without instantly treating them as absolute, unchangeable facts, a great pocket of cool air opens up within your chest. You begin to recognize that the desperate urge to correct the past is actually a deep grief pretending to be control. Tonight, you are permitted to let the horizon remain completely dark without assuming that its emptiness is a sign of your failure. Now, as the dark hour deepens, this fluid, spacious perspective begins to settle directly into the practical details of your ordinary days. We can begin to trace exactly how this forest wisdom applies to the immediate, modern moments of your waking life, where the pressure to achieve validation is felt most intensely. By looking closely at the patterns of our daily reactions, the deep roots of this mental tension naturally begin to loosen their hold on the heart. The internal courtroom begins to look less like a solid fortress and more like a collection of old dust that can be cleared away by a single cool evening breeze. You do not need to settle the balance of your old arguments to deserve comfort in this specific moment, because the night wind does not ask who planted the grove before it cools the ridge. It is entirely enough to feel the steady weight of the mattress supporting your form, letting the natural rhythm of your breath match the slow, patient turning of the earth. Every heavy memory that rises into your awareness can be observed like a tiny flake of frost turning over in the breeze, moving across the bark but never breaking the vessel that holds your presence. You are entering a much deeper layer of the valley now, where the echoes of the old crossroads are completely muffled by the vast space of the night, and the ground provides a continuous, unbroken sanctuary for your body. The air is thick with the scent of damp cedar and quiet charcoal, inviting you to drop the heavy role of the navigator completely. Let the silence do its work, softening the sharp borders of the day, as we prepare to carry this path into the waking world. Consider how much vital energy is consumed by trying to guarantee that tomorrow contains absolute clarity. We build vast mental reservoirs to contain every potential misunderstanding, yet the leakage always occurs in a spot we never planned to guard. The mind becomes utterly exhausted by its own defenses, constructing elaborate structures against shadows that possess no actual physical weight. In the quiet view of the old gatherer, the presence of the old mistake is merely the presence of the mistake. It carries no ultimate authority over your character, no secret truth about your value, and no power to dictate your peace, unless you weave a net to capture it. When you allow the situation to be imperfect without concluding that you have failed your life, the sharp edges of the inner voice begin to blunt, losing their ability to pierce your evening rest. The habit of turning your personal wounds into a permanent identity is often just a plea for your deep weariness to be seen by an environment that has been looking away. We wear our exhaustion like a heavy coat of oil-stained wood, hoping someone will perceive the burden and give us permission to lie down. But you do not require a sign from the forest to unbuckle the straps tonight. The ground beneath you does not ask you to prove how much you have suffered before it agrees to carry your frame. You can step out of the heavy armor completely, leaving it to dissolve in the frost, while your true self returns to the vast, open atmosphere that requires no walls to remain stable. Let the stillness of the room occupy the spaces where the regret used to live, widening your awareness until the mistake itself feels like a single blade of dry grass resting in the vast palm of the night. This silent, grounding perspective belongs directly inside the modern friction of your typical afternoon, far away from the quiet shelter of the ancient fir canopy. Consider the sharp internal tightening that occurs when you stare at a dark screen, waiting for a single text to confirm your social standing. The delay feels like a heavy block of cold iron, and your mind immediately begins to pace through its old memories, searching for patterns in the silence. Think of the distinct exhaustion of sitting in a bright room, forcing a pleasant smile while the space behind your shoulder blades feels completely heavy, dark, and strained. You watch the achievements of others on a digital feed and conclude that your own life is lagging far behind, as if you have permanently strayed from some imaginary timeline of success. When you finally allow your limbs to sit still to rest, a wave of internal criticism washes over you, whispering that you have not accomplished enough to earn the right to breathe quietly. We can bring peace into these immediate, sharp moments by altering how we relate to our internal mapmakers. You practice this forest wisdom when you notice the urgent impulse to check your device for reassurance. Yet you choose to let your hands rest openly on your lap for just 3 slow breaths instead. You are practicing it when a critical memory tells you that you are fundamentally behind, and you simply witness that mental image without obeying its sudden call to panic. We can care deeply about our relationships without wrapping our fingers so tightly around them that we crush the natural growth of the connection. You do not need to resolve every old misunderstanding from your past before you are permitted to enjoy your own evening clearing. Rest is not a luxury you receive only after you have successfully glued every fallen needle back onto the tree. It is the very soil that allows your spirit to recover its balance in the first place. When you refuse to turn your old crossroads into a permanent identity, the daily landscape begins to soften. You stop viewing every difficult conversation as a personal evaluation that you are required to win. Instead of trying to force a stubborn situation to yield the perfect clarity you crave, you learn the art of lateral release, quietly allowing the uncertainty to exist without needing to fix it immediately. This is not apathy, and it is not defeat. It is the profound recognition that a seed does not lose its vital essence just because it fell into an unexpected patch of shade. In the final stretch of our evening journey, we will let these daily efforts fade completely into the background, allowing the entire forest to dissolve into the deep, quiet rhythm of total rest. As the darkness closes in, the cracked container finds its absolute stillness. Lying awake under the heavy covers, the mind often tries to settle old accounts by arguing with ghosts. We reconstruct the choices that bruised us, offering late justifications to a jury that has already vanished into the fog. This internal debate is simply the sound of the old horn vial pouring its cold residue over your rest, an exhausting pattern that yields nothing but dust. Tonight, you are permitted to let the ledger drop without a final calculation. You do not need to prove the wisdom of your journey to the room, nor do you need to convince the dark that you did your absolute best, even if the world never acknowledges the hidden wealth of your current ground. Your value remains completely intact, rooted deep in your own quiet presence. The spacious self within you does not require an external mirror to know its own depth. It simply requires room to settle. Let the room become a wide valley where no coordinates are required, letting the old maps themselves float away like dry cedar needles carried by the breeze. You can feel the safety of this quiet release in the very center of your chest, where the tight boundaries are lines that are finally dissolving into space. The urge to calculate the future or repair the past is fading into a slow, gentle murmur that matches the turning of the earth. You are completely safe to drop the heavy role of the navigator tonight, allowing the night to hold your path without any active direction from your thoughts. Every long, quiet breath is a bridge leading you away from the sharp cliffs of regret, drawing you down into the soft, unmapped terrain where the current naturally slows down. The ground does not struggle to support the forest. It simply yields to the weight, providing a heavy, soothing peace that prepares the spirit for absolute rest. Consider the deep relief that arrives when you choose not to obey the urgent inner command to fix your position immediately. We live in a culture that treats waiting like a failure of the will, forcing us to constantly reach for devices, explanations, or control. But you are permitted to let the world remain unresolved on the table, dark and silent, while you claim the space inside your own ribs. When you stop treating every anxious prediction as a factual map of tomorrow, the heavy architecture of panic begins to break apart on its own. You see that you can love another human being without needing to carve their journey into a shape that matches your blueprint. True care is like a wide forest horizon, holding the trees safely without attempting to dictate the movement of the fog. Let the night widen around your bed, erasing the boundaries of the daytime worries, and leaving only the gentle, unhurried cadence of a chest that has finally earned the right to remain completely still. The room has grown completely still now, as the final shadows of the winter dusk stretch out and blend into the dark. The frantic navigating of the heavy phantom map has ceased, leaving only the soft, ambient hum of the mountain fog outside your window. Let your limbs sink fully into the mattress, feeling your shoulders, your back, and your hips become heavy, like a smooth fallen log settling into deep cedar mold. The breath is slowing down, moving with a quiet, natural rhythm that requires absolutely no guidance from your conscious thoughts. The air enters softly, and the air leaves softly, a gentle movement that knows exactly how to pass through this immediate clearing without any friction. You are allowed to let the entire structure of the old crossroads dissolve right now. The decisions you could not undo, the parallel lives that were never built, and the routes that remained unchosen can all be left behind on the dark valley floor. Imagine a single damp cedar needle slipping silently from a high branch above, falling down through the cool air toward a patch of dark velvet moss. This deep ground needs no perfect coordinates to be perfectly safe, and it requires no navigation to hold the space securely. Your awareness is expanding outward, softening at the edges, becoming as vast and accommodating as that silent clearing beneath the night. There is no need to keep watch at the junction of your memories tonight. The mind can rest from its long stewardship, knowing that the foundation ahead will remain perfectly stable without your constant pressure. You have permission to cease the calculating, allowing the atmosphere of your spirit to seek its own depth in the quiet hours ahead. Sleep is arriving like a slow, dark frost, filling every fold of your being with a profound, spacious ease. The cracked, oil-stained horn vial has been left far behind on the shelf, and the notched wooden handle of the trowel rests quietly in the dark hut, out of reach and out of mind. The open canopy above remains completely smooth, containing only the vast, unbothered dark of a winter sky that asks for no perfect roots or forced corrections. You can feel this exact stillness taking root in the space behind your shoulder blades, where the old pull of regret is losing its heavy shape. The soft, horizontal spread of your breath is carrying you further away from the narrow courtrooms of what might have been, letting you float freely on a quiet current of space that trusts the ground exactly as it forms. Every muscle in your lower back is releasing its final hidden grip, allowing the unspoken explanations to dissolve into the cool, silent air of the night. You are returning home to the ancient source that existed long before the first choice was ever made, a place of pure presence that knows how to remain whole, even when the old roads are completely overgrown. Let the blankets hold your frame as if you were the forest itself, rooted deep, untouched by the passing paths, and perfectly content to let the winter unfold in its own unhurried time. The air in your lungs is cool and clean, matching the slow, rhythmic movement of the wind as it passes through the secret, soft veins of the dark earth. You are permitted to let go of the entire history you have been trying so hard to fix, allowing the deep tide of slumber to take you down into a heavy, restorative rest where the active self recedes. The long labor ends, and only the vast, silent valley remains, holding your presence peacefully through the infinite dark. What if the splintered place where you believed you were broken was actually the only soil deep enough to grow your true peace? The splintered place where you believed you were broken was actually the only soil deep enough to grow your true peace. Because the ground does not require a flawless surface to nourish the living roots that run beneath it. The forest floor accepts the fractured bark, the fallen wood, and the decaying leaves with the exact same quiet grace that it offers to the tallest, most upright fir tree on the ridge. In this deep layer of the valley night, the cool air settles heavily into the low hollows, carrying away the final, faint vibrations of the old mapmaker's worry. The mental calculation of what could have been is losing its grip, dissolving into the vast, dark expanse of a landscape that knows nothing of wrong turns or missed destinies. You can feel a profound horizontal release spreading across your lower ribs, a slow widening that allows your chest to occupy its true space without checking for permission from the past. There is no trial left to conduct in the silence of this room, no old crossroad to defend, and no version of yourself to salvage from the shadows of memory. Let the mattress take the absolute completeness of your weight now, letting the long, tired muscles of your thighs, your hips, and your lower back unburden themselves entirely into the supportive quiet. You are no longer the traveler standing at the edge of the lowlands, torn between two directions. You are the immense, unbothered presence of the valley floor itself, holding the winter mist and the dark timber in perfect, patient equilibrium. Your breathing has slowed to a long, effortless whisper, a gentle tide of clean air that arrives without a destination and returns without a single trace of regret. With each slow exhalation, the heavy illusion of a parallel path recedes further into the dark, fading like an old footprint that the heavy mountain frost has completely covered over and smoothed away. You are resting in the clean, unwritten reality of this immediate moment, a quiet sanctuary that requires no external verification to be completely whole. The oil-stained horn vial on the distant shelf has become nothing more than a simple piece of the material world, sleeping quietly in the dark, stripped of all the heavy meaning your mind used to pour into its cracks. You do not need to construct an ideal explanation for tomorrow's uncertainties, or patch over the vulnerabilities that surface during the heat of the afternoon. The cool air moving through your lungs is soft and steady, matching the deep, subterranean stillness of the cedar roots far beneath the snow, completely untouched by the passing opinions or changing metrics of the world outside. You are given full, unconditional permission to stop analyzing the trajectory of your journey tonight, allowing the deep, heavy current of sleep to draw your awareness down into a profound, restorative rest where the active mind recedes, the long navigating ends, and only the vast, silent woods remain. Holding your presence peacefully through the infinite dark, The absolute silence of this northern slope expands far beyond the reach of your old arguments, providing an ancient refuge where the voice of self-judgment has no room to echo. In this wide clearing, you are no longer the keeper of the ledger or the judge of the past. You are simply the spacious awareness that witnesses the slow deepening of the night. The immense weight of a forgotten choice, which felt so solid and unyielding during the hours of labor, has lost its physical authority, melting away like a single drop of seed oil into the vast damp velvet of the moss. You can feel the steady ancient security of the ground beneath your form, a patient presence that has held the weight of countless winters without ever demanding a route or asking you to prove your direction. The body accepts this complete safety, allowing the tiny muscles around your eyes, your jaw, and your temples to release their last hidden alignment, sinking effortlessly into the dark. As the late hours settle into their quietest depths, the memory of the crossroads becomes nothing more than a faint cloud of mist passing through the high canopy above. You see clearly now that your life was never a narrow line that could be permanently broken by a single decision. It was always an expansive, living ecosystem, capable of growing its own vital beauty wherever the seed happened to land. There is no failure in letting the heavy trowel rest on the bench, and there is no shame in claiming the soft, unmapped ground where your spirit can finally find its true home. The mind has completely abandoned its frantic search for a better history, recognizing that the urge to fix the past is just the old navigation loop turning in a circle. Tonight, the paths themselves are allowed to fade from view, dissolving into the cool, silent space that holds every fragment of your experience in a single, unbroken piece. You are completely unburdened now, resting on the surface of a deep, shoreless quiet that requires no labor to earn, no defense to protect, and no validation from the world to enjoy. Let the soft, absolute darkness of the late hour wrap around your bed like a protective sanctuary, shielding your awareness from the bright demands of tomorrow's expectations. You do not have to settle a single relationship before the dawn, and you do not have to carry the architecture of your old mistakes into the quiet harbor of this rest. The living presence within you is returning to its ancient source, a vast ocean of clear, quiet space that remains entirely untouched by the shifting tides of human narrative. Every muscle in your body has gone soft, the brow is perfectly smooth, the breath is quiet, and the heart has completely surrendered its final grip, allowing you to slide gently into the deep, healing waters of absolute slumber. The tide of the night is carrying you away now, safely, softly, into a profound and unbroken sleep where the self recedes, the struggle ends, and only the vast, empty sky remains, holding the valley peacefully through the infinite dark. The vast, empty sky remains, holding the valley peacefully through the infinite dark. Because the ultimate nature of this space has never been dependent on the shapes of the clouds that drift across its brow. The mountain ridge beneath your body does not ask how many times the weather changed during the summer, nor does it keep an account of the storms that shook the high timber before the winter arrived. It simply remains as it is, an immense, immovable presence that supports the entire forest floor without a single drop of effort. In this quiet depth of the night, the remaining structures of your daytime thoughts are losing their hard outlines, softening into the slow, heavy rhythm of an earth that knows how to hold everything without holding on to anything. You can feel the deep relaxation traveling down through your spine, down into your hips, and out through the long muscles of your legs, as the very last necessity to navigate or control your life dissolves into the vast, dark expanse of the room. There is no old choice that can separate you from the safety of this immediate ground. And there is no phantom timeline that can diminish the rich, living reality of the air moving through your ribs right now. The mind has finally ceased its long, exhausting watch over the crossroads, allowing the oil-stained horn vial to sit in the shadows as nothing more than a quiet piece of the world. You do not need to prepare a defense for the vulnerabilities that arose during the week. And you do not need to settle the balance of your old expectations before the morning light returns to the valley. The breath has become a perfectly natural, unhurried wave, a soft movement of moisture and air that arrives like the midnight fog and departs like the mountain wind, leaving the clearing completely clean, completely still, and beautifully free. You are resting in the original, uncarved center of your own existence, a sanctuary that requires no external mirrors to know its own depth, and no perfect history to be completely complete. Let the heavy, ancient stillness of the late hour wrap around your awareness like the protective mist that blankets the deep cedar groves, keeping your spirit entirely safe from the bright worries of the waking world. The paths you did not choose have faded entirely into the dark, possessing no more weight or presence than the shadows of the birds that flew over the canopy hours ago. You are given full, absolute permission to let go of the entire narrative of your life tonight, allowing the deep, dark current of sleep to draw you down into a heavy, restorative rest where the active mind recedes, the long labor ends, and only the vast, silent valley remains, holding your presence peacefully through the infinite dark. The absolute silence of this deep basin extends far beyond the reach of human memories, offering an ancient refuge where the noise of comparison has died away entirely. In this wide courtyard of the forest, you are no longer the keeper of the old maps or the judge of the past. You are simply the calm, spacious awareness that witnesses the slow turning of the winter night. The immense pressures to carve a perfect path, which felt so solid during the day, have lost their physical authority, melting away like a single flake of frost landing on the dark damp of the earth. You can feel the steady, unconditional support of the ground beneath your form, a patient presence that holds your weariness without asking for an itinerary or requiring you to justify the space you occupy. The body fully accepts this complete safety, allowing the tiny muscles around your eyes, your jaw, and your temples to go perfectly loose, sinking effortlessly into the soft expanse of the dark. As the midnight hours deepen into their quietest core, the recollection of the old crossroad becomes nothing more than a distant whisper, a sound that no longer holds any power over your heart. You see clearly now that your life was never a fragile line that could be ruined by a single decision. It was always an expansive, living forest, capable of growing its own unique beauty wherever the seed happened to land. There is no failure in letting the heavy tools rest on the bench, and there is no shame in choosing the soft, yielding stillness where your spirit can finally find its true home. The mind has completely abandoned its frantic search for a better history, recognizing that the urge to fix the past is just the old navigation loop, turning in a circle. Tonight, the paths themselves are allowed to dissolve, melting into the cool, silent space that holds every fragment of your experience in a single unbroken piece. You are completely unburdened now, floating on the surface of a deep, shoreless quiet that requires no labor to earn, no defense to protect, and no validation from the world to enjoy. Let the soft, absolute darkness of the late hour wrap around your bed like a protective cloak, keeping your awareness safe from the bright worries of tomorrow's schedule. You do not have to resolve a single conflict before the morning, and you do not have to carry the weight of your history into the sanctuary of this rest. The living current within you is returning to its ancient source, a vast ocean of quiet presence that remains untouched by the shifting tides of human circumstance. Every muscle in your body has gone soft, the brow is perfectly smooth, the breath is quiet, and the heart has completely surrendered its final grip, allowing you to slide gently into the deep, healing waters of absolute sleep. The tide of the night is taking you under now, safely, softly, into a profound and unbroken slumber where the self disappears, the struggle ends, and only the vast empty sky remains, holding the valley peacefully through the infinite dark.